All right, let's jump right in. I want you to picture something. The year is 1914. You've got amazing new technologies. You've got this incredible culture, high fashion. I mean, it really felt like the absolute peak of civilization. But what nobody saw coming was that the world was about to dive headfirst into one of the worst conflicts in all of human history. And this quote, I mean, it just nails the absurdity of it all, doesn't it? Let's have a war. Because, under that shiny, civilized veneer, Europe was a total powder keg. You have France, still angry about losing land to Germany. Then you have Germany building this huge navy that's making Great Britain, the world's #1 sea power, really, really nervous. Plus, you've got these massive old empires that are kind of falling apart at the seams, trying to keep a lid on all these nationalist movements. So yeah, everyone's side-eyeing each other, and on top of all that, the weapons are getting scarier than ever. So to try and keep all this tension in check, Europe gets itself tangled up in this giant web of alliances. Think of them like tripwires. You had one team, the Entente powers, that's France, Britain, and Russia, and then the other team, the Central powers, with Germany and Austria-Hungary as the main players. Basically, all these treaties boil down to one simple rule. You start a fight with my buddy, you're starting a fight with me. And a system like that, well, it means that one tiny little spark in some small corner of the continent could set the whole thing on fire. And boy, was that spark about to get lit. So, how does it all kick off? Well, you might be thinking it was some big epic battle, right? Nope. It all started with one guy, one car, and an absolutely insane bit of bad luck in a city called Sarajevo. You seriously cannot make this story up. The Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, is in Sarajevo. Assassins try to blow up his car with a bomb. They miss. The bomb hits the car behind him, so the Archduke, feeling bad, decides to go visit the injured people in the hospital. But then, his driver takes a wrong turn, and by the most unbelievable cosmic coincidence, the car stalls. And where does it stall? Right in front of one of the assassins who had failed earlier. This time, he doesn't miss. Just think about that. One wrong turn, and it drags the entire world into war. And this is where you see those tripwires in action. It's a total domino effect. Austria-Hungary is furious, obviously, so they declare war on Serbia. But Russia is Serbia's big protector, so they start getting their army ready. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, sees this and declares war on Russia, which then pulls in Russia's ally France. Then Germany invades neutral Belgium to get a clear shot at France. And that's the last straw for Britain. They declare war on Germany. And just like that, in about a week, all the dominoes have toppled over. Europe is at war. Now, when you think of World War I, you probably picture the muddy trenches in France, right? And that's a huge part of it, for sure. But what's so important to remember is that this was the first truly global war. The fighting wasn't just stuck in Europe. No way. It stretched across continents and oceans, pulling in huge empires and all their colonies from every corner of the globe. I mean, the scale was just mind-boggling. You had battles raging in the deserts of the Middle East, with the British fighting the Ottoman Empire. Over in Africa, the Allies were busy trying to snatch up Germany's colonies. And then there was the Eastern Front, this massive, sprawling, frozen battlefield where Russia was locked in a brutal fight with Germany and Austria-Hungary. It really wasn't just one war. It was a whole bunch of different wars, all happening at the same time in completely different parts of the world. And the war didn't just spread out geographically, it expanded into brand new arenas of combat. For the first time, you had this massive war at sea. Naval blockades were literally starving entire countries. German U-boats, submarines, were silently hunting beneath the waves, taking down military and even civilian ships. And then there was the air. This was a total game changer. Airplanes went from being just, scouting tools to actual fighter planes, engaging in these crazy dogfights high above the battlefield. But with all that said, the image that really defines this war, the one we all know, is the Western Front. Germany had this grand plan for a quick, decisive victory, but it stalled out just short of Paris. And so both sides did the only thing they could do: they dug in. And they created this unbelievable network of trenches that stretched all the way from Switzerland to the English Channel. And right there, a new, absolutely horrific kind of warfare was born. So put yourself in the shoes of a general for a second. This is the nightmare puzzle they had to solve for 4 straight years. You've got your line of trenches, the enemy has their line of trenches, and in between is this blasted, dead-end wasteland called no man's land. So the question is, how in the world do you break through their defenses when they're just waiting for you, dug in with machine guns, without getting every single one of your soldiers killed? Well, the answer they kept trying was just brutal. and it barely ever worked. Here's the cycle. First, you'd have a massive artillery barrage. We're talking shells raining down for days sometimes, trying to smash up the enemy lines. Then, the whistles would shriek, and the order would come over the top. Thousands of men would climb out of their trenches and charge across no man's land. But the defenders, they were just waiting for it. They'd open up with machine guns and just mow them down. Thousands and thousands of men would die, all to maybe gain a few feet of useless, muddy ground. And just living in those trenches, it was a nightmare. A literal hell on earth. We're talking about mud so deep it could suck you down and not let go. It was crawling with giant rats. You don't even want to know what they were eating. Disease was everywhere. And every single second you were living with the random chance of being blown up by an artillery shell, picked off by a sniper, or choked to death by poison gas. The mental toll was just astronomical. It's where the term shell shock came from. It's honestly hard to even comprehend that millions of people lived like this, day in and day out, for years. So for the first 3 years of all this horror, there's one huge player just watching from the sidelines, the United States. President Woodrow Wilson was absolutely determined to keep America out of what he and a lot of Americans saw as Europe's problem. This whole idea was called isolationism, and it wasn't a new thing. It was a deeply ingrained part of American identity. The thinking was, hey, let's focus on our own backyard and not get tangled up in Europe's constant drama. In fact, it was so popular that Wilson actually won his re-election in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." So, what changed his mind? Well, it all came down to Germany's U-boats. They made a really risky gamble and went back to a policy of unrestricted submarine warfare. That meant their subs were ordered to sink any ship heading for Britain. Military, cargo, passenger ships, it didn't matter. No warning. So when American ships started getting sunk and American citizens started dying, the public outrage back home just exploded. That was it. That was the last straw. The U.S. had no choice but to declare war, and suddenly America's massive industrial might was on its way to Europe. But here's the thing about Wilson. He wasn't just getting in to win. He had a much bigger, more idealistic goal. He wanted to completely remake the world so a war like this could never, ever happen again. He laid out this vision in what he called his 14 points. It was a pretty radical plan, calling for things like no more secret treaties, free trade, and, this is the big one, a general association of nations, kind of like a world council, to talk out problems instead of fighting over them. This was his dream. This is how he was going to make this the actual war to end all wars. And you know what? America's entry really did turn the tide. With those fresh troops and supplies, the Central Powers just couldn't hold on. By late 1918, it was over. But the world that came out the other side, it was a completely different place. It was broken, it was scarred. The war left behind a level of death and destruction nobody had ever seen before, and it literally redrew the map of the world. Just try to wrap your head around this number. Over 10 million soldiers killed. Think about that. An entire generation of young men in Europe just gone, wiped out. The world was left drowning in grief and trauma on a scale that's almost impossible for us to imagine today. And politically, it was an earthquake. Look at this. 4 massive, powerful empires that had been around for centuries just vanished. Poof. The German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire, all of them collapsed. In their place, a bunch of new countries popped up, which of course led to a whole new set of problems. The old world was well and truly gone. So at the peace conference, Wilson actually gets his big prize. He succeeds in creating his General Association of Nations, which they call the League of Nations. But then comes the most tragic irony of all. He comes home and he can't even get his own country to sign on. The U.S. Senate was afraid it would just drag America into Europe's next war, so they refused to join. And that isolationism came roaring back, crippling Wilson's dream organization before it even had a chance to get started. Which leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? On one hand, the war completely changed the world. It toppled 4 empires. But on the other hand, the peace treaty they came up with was so harsh on Germany that it planted the seeds of resentment and anger. And that anger created the perfect environment for extremism to grow, leading directly to a second, even more horrific world war just 2 decades later. So, was the war to end all wars a failure? Did it do anything but pave the road for the next one? That's a heavy question, and it's a legacy we are still dealing with.